All right, so get ready because today we're diving deep into process philosophy.
Oh, this is a fun one.
Yeah, have you ever thought not just about what things are, but what it even means for things to be?
It's a big question.
Yeah, it's a huge question, and that's where process philosophy comes in.
Yeah, it really flips how we usually think about, well, just about everything.
Definitely flips things on their head. So instead of thinking about static things, process philosophy is all about,
Becoming.
yeah, becoming. It's all about change and becoming over static existence. It's a whole different way of seeing the world.
It really is a totally different perspective.
So how does process philosophy change how we usually think about the world?
Okay, so for a long time, Western philosophy has been all about substance metaphysics.
Okay.
This idea that everything is made up of these unchanging, these fundamental substances, kind of like Lego blocks, making up everything we see.
So like a chair is made up of wood, and that substance, wood, has properties that make it a chair.
Exactly. But then process philosophy comes in and says,
Wait a minute.
yeah, what if all those things, those static things, are actually dynamic processes, like a river?
Oh, okay.
Instead of these fixed Legos, it's more like this constantly flowing river, always moving and changing.
That's a really cool way to think about it. So it's not so much what things are, but more like how they exist, always changing over time.
Exactly.
Well, and that makes sense when you think about how much change we see every day. You know, people
Yeah.
age, seasons change, things are always transforming.
Yeah, change is the only constant.
It really is. So
Yeah.
how does process philosophy take that and make it into this whole philosophical system?
Well, it makes some really bold claims. First, it says that this substance idea, this whole idea that there are these unchanging building blocks,
Right.
it says that that might not be the whole picture. You know, it's just one way of looking at things, and maybe it's not the best way.
Hmm. So it's like we've been wearing these substance glasses for so long that we forgot they're even there. And process philosophy is like, hey, take those off.
Yes, exactly.
See the world in a new way.
And then its second claim is that process-based theories, they can explain the world just as well as those traditional substance theories, maybe even better.
Okay, can you give me an example?
Sure, so think about consciousness.
Okay.
How can static substances like inert matter suddenly create and experience, awareness?
Right. It's a tough question.
It's a puzzle, and it's one that process philosophy has a different answer to.
Okay.
It says that consciousness isn't a static thing in some part of the brain,
Right.
but it's actually a process. It's a flow of experiences, always changing and shaping itself.
Oh, so instead of looking for consciousness like it's an object in the brain, we should think of it as something that emerges
Yeah.
from all these processes in the brain, always changing.
Exactly. And that leads to the third big claim of process philosophy.
Okay, what's that?
That process philosophy opens up all these new philosophical questions we couldn't even think about with the substance idea.
Like what kind of questions?
Well, think about emergence. How do new properties or new entities arise from simpler things? Right.
Or think about self-organization. You know, how do systems organize themselves without some blueprint? These are questions that process philosophy really digs into.
So it's more than just swapping substances for processes. It's about new ways of thinking about and asking questions about reality.
Exactly. It's a whole new perspective.
Well, this is blowing my mind already, but to really get this kind about it, we need to meet the minds behind it, right?
Absolutely. And that's what we're going to do next time. We'll talk about the key thinkers in process philosophy, the ones who really developed these ideas.
Okay, I'm ready for it. This is already an amazing deep dive.
Yeah, it's going to be a good one.
Can't wait to hear more next time.
Welcome back to our deep dive into process philosophy. So last time we talked about how this whole approach is about shifting our thinking away from static substances and towards this dynamic nature of reality.
Yeah, it's like we're trading in our old tools for a whole new set. And to figure out how to use those tools, I think we need to meet the people who designed them. I like that. And you're right. To really get process philosophy, we need to look at the minds behind it, the people who came up with these ideas. We already talked about Heraclitus, but his ideas were more like, well, just the beginning.
Okay.
To really see process philosophy as a complete system, we need to jump way ahead.
So who are these big names in process thought? Who really built that system?
One of the most important is Alfred North Whitehead, a philosopher and a mathematician.
Yeah.
He's often called the father of modern process philosophy.
I've heard of Whitehead, but to be honest, I've always been kind of intimidated by his work.
Yeah.
Can you give me like the process philosophy, Whitehead for Beginners version?
Okay, I'll try my best. So Whitehead developed this really complex but fascinating system called the philosophy of organism.
Okay.
And his main idea is that reality is made up of these tiny event-like things called actual occasions.
Okay, actual occasion. That's interesting, but I need a little more. What are those exactly?
Okay, imagine a single drop of water in a river. Each drop is unique, and it has the history of the river up to that point, and it contributes to the river's flow. That's kind of like an actual occasion.
Okay.
They're not static things. They're more like these tiny bursts of experience, and each one combines the entire universe up to that moment.
Wow. So each of these tiny events, these actual occasions, contains like the entire history of the universe up to that point.
Yeah, it's a lot to handle.
It really is. So they're not just reflecting the past, they're helping create new actual occasions too.
Exactly. It's this constant process of taking past experiences and creating new ones, this flow of becoming.
So reality, according to Whitehead, is like this giant symphony of all these experiences always making new patterns.
I like that. That's a really good way to put it. And for Whitehead, the thing that drives this whole process of becoming is creativity.
Okay.
And creativity isn't just something people do. For Whitehead, it's like this ultimate principle of reality, the force that runs the whole cosmos.
Wow. So creativity isn't just some human thing, it's the driving force of the entire universe.
Yeah, and that changes how we see ourselves in the universe. We're not just watching, we're part of this creation.
So Whitehead gives us this really big cosmic picture of process philosophy. But were there others who explored these ideas in different ways, maybe more down-to-earth ways?
Yes, definitely. William James, he was one of the founders of American pragmatism,
Okay.
and he took process philosophy and used it to study human experience. He was especially interested in how consciousness is always changing.
Oh, William James. I know a little bit about his work. Wasn't he also really into the idea that our beliefs and actions change how we see reality?
You got it. James said that reality isn't just some fixed thing out there waiting to be discovered.
Right.
Instead, it's shaped by how we interact with it. He said that our beliefs are like tools for navigating the world,
Right.
and they're true if they help us live our lives.
So for James, process philosophy wasn't just some theory in a book. It was about how we live and act in the world.
Exactly. And John Dewey, another pragmatist, he really emphasized the practical side of things too. He saw experience as this dynamic process of learning and adapting,
Okay.
always learning and changing based on our interaction with the world around us.
So we have Whitehead with his grand vision, James focused on the flow of consciousness, and Dewey on the day-to-day experience of being part of this process. It seems like process philosophy applies to so many things.
It really does. And these are just three of the many thinkers who have shaped process philosophy. They each have their own perspective, and that shows just how broad and deep this approach is.
It's like process philosophy is a meta-philosophy, a way of looking at the world that can change how we see all these different philosophical questions.
I like that. And one of the most exciting things about process philosophy is how relevant it is to science today. A lot of scientific discoveries seem to support these process ideas.
Really? So you're saying that science is actually backing up this radical process view of the world? I need to hear more about this. All right, I'm ready to hear how process philosophy and science go together. It's not every day you see ancient ideas backed up by the latest science.
It is pretty amazing. One of the coolest examples is in quantum physics, because quantum physics has totally changed that old Newtonian view of the world, the one where everything is solid and independent.
Yeah, quantum physics is famous for being a little mind-bending. So what does it say instead of that neat and tidy picture?
It says that reality is, well, a little fuzzy, it's probabilistic, and it's inherently dynamic. Think about things like wave-particle duality, where particles can act like waves spread out, or quantum entanglement, where two particles are connected no matter how far apart they are.
Right.
Those things don't fit into that old substance view of reality.
So instead of solid building blocks, quantum physics says that reality is more interconnected and fluid, more process-like. I guess it's like the universe itself is a massive web of processes, always changing, just like process philosophy says.
Exactly, and it's not just physics. We see this in things like cognitive science, too, where the embodied cognition approach says that how we interact with the world actually shapes our mental processes.
So it's not just that we have a mind.
Right.
It's that we're always making mind through our interactions. It's a process.
Absolutely.
Okay, so process philosophy isn't just some abstract theory. It actually connects to what science is discovering about the world.
It totally does.
Oh, yeah.
But like any powerful tool, process philosophy also has some challenges that come with it.
Oh, I was wondering when we get to those, okay, what are the hurdles we have to deal with when we're using this process approach?
One of the biggest ones is figuring out what we even mean by dynamicity. We talk about processes being dynamic and change being fundamental, but what does that actually mean?
Mm.
How do we define it in a really clear way?
It's easy to say things are always changing, but how do we really capture that idea of change, like in a precise philosophical way?
That's the question, right? Some process philosophers look to language. They say we can find dynamic entities by how we talk about them. For example, sentences like the river is flowing, that kind of captures how processes are ongoing.
So it's like looking for clues about dynamicity and how we use language.
Yeah.
That's interesting, but I can see how it could get messy. I mean, different languages might express things differently.
You're right, language can be tricky, so some process philosophers prefer a more, metaphysical approach, using ideas like potentiality and actuality that say that dynamic entities are always actualizing their potential. They're always becoming something new.
Oh, so it's about unfolding, moving from what's possible to what's real. I like that. But isn't there a chance we get lost in abstract concepts if we get too metaphysical?
Yeah, there is. That's why some people go for a more naturalist approach. They ground dynamicity in physics. They talk about entropy, the tendency towards disorder, and self-organization, where order emerges from randomness. They say dynamicity is just built into the universe.
So there's no single definition of dynamicity. Process philosophers are trying different ways to understand it, finding the right tools for the job.
Exactly. And that leads to another challenge. How do processes relate to space and time?
Okay.
This is a big one because we usually think of things as existing in space and time, like space and time are these containers for reality.
Yeah, if things are really processes always changing, how does that work with how we think about space and time?
Well, some process philosophers, following Whitehead, say that processes actually make up space and time.
Oh, wow.
So space and time aren't these containers, they emerge from how processes interact.
So it's like instead of a stage where the play happens, the actors are actually building the stage as they perform.
That's a really good way to think about it. It means we need to rethink our whole understanding of how reality is structured. Some other process philosophers take a different approach. They say that processes still exist in space and time, but they question that traditional difference between endurance and perdurance.
Okay, remind me what those are again.
Sure. So endurance is the idea that things exist through time by being fully present at every moment, like a rock. We think of it as enduring, always being itself.
Right.
Perdurance is the idea that things exist by having parts that stretch across time, like a person. We change over time. We have different parts that make up our whole life.
Right, I remember now. So how do processes mess with those categories?
Well, processes seem to be both enduring and perduring. They endure because they're always happening, always becoming.
Okay.
But they also perdure because they unfold over time. Earlier stages lead to later stages.
So processes kind of break down those neat categories of endurance and perdurance. It's like process philosophy is always pushing us to question how we think about reality.
You got it. And then there's another challenge. How do processes combine and interact to make the world we see? If everything is a process, it's not just about individual processes, it's about how they connect and form bigger, more complex processes.
Yeah, it's like we need to understand the whole network of processes, not just single ones.
Right, and process philosophy says we need new ways to understand how that works. Our usual logic and set theory, which are based on static things and categories, they might not be enough.
So are process philosophers making whole new types of logic to make sense of this dynamic reality?
Yeah, some are using mereology. That's the study of part-whole relationships. They're asking how do processes make up wholes, and how are those wholes different from just the parts added up?
Okay.
Others are using category theory, a kind of math that deals with abstract structures and how they relate. It's a way to map out how all these processes interact.
Wow, it sounds like process philosophy is changing, not just philosophy, but math too. It's making us come up with new ways to think about this dynamic reality.
It is. And finally, there's the challenge of connecting process philosophy to our everyday lives, if this is how reality works.
Ah.
How do we make sense of it in our daily lives? How do we connect these abstract ideas to what we experience?
Yeah, it can all sound very theoretical. How do we actually live with this process view of the world?
Well, some people point to consciousness itself. Our awareness isn't a static thing, it's a flow of thoughts and feelings and sensations.
Okay.
It's process happening right in our minds.
So by paying attention to our own experience, to how our thoughts and feelings are always changing, we can start to understand what it means for reality to be a dynamic process.
Exactly. Others focus on how we interact with the world, every action we take, every encounter. It's a process of change. We're not separate from reality. We're part of it, always shaping it and being shaped by it.
So process philosophy isn't just about how the universe works out there, it's about how we experience and take part in that reality right now.
Precisely. And that's one of the most powerful things about process philosophy. It lets us see ourselves not as separate, static individuals, but as parts of this interconnected web of being.
That's a really cool thought. It makes me wonder if reality is really this process of becoming. What does that say about who we are and our place in the universe?
That's a great question to think about, and one that process philosophy encourages us to ask. It reminds us that we're not finished products, we're works in progress, always changing and becoming.
And that the universe itself is this huge ongoing experiment of creativity and change. That's a pretty hanging way to look at things.
It really is. It opens up so many possibilities for us and for the universe we're part of.
Well, I think we've reached the surface after this deep dive into process philosophy, and it's been quite a journey.
It has. Process philosophy is definitely complex and challenging, but it gives us a totally different way of understanding reality, and I think a better one.
I agree, and it's a philosophy that's still developing and changing, so who knows what new ideas we'll find as we keep exploring this way of thinking.
I can't wait to find out. And to everyone listening, we hope you've enjoyed this as much as we have.
It's been great diving deep with you all today. Keep those minds curious and those hearts open until next time. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and embrace the change.